How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Sector 6, and today we're finally going to start the process of little theories. We're going to start off with little theories, then we're going to start building up and building up and building up. Today, the first thing that we're going to speak about is, who is the hooded figure? Like, we've had loose confirmation of who it could be, but I don't know. It feels like a red herring. It feels like a misdirect, maybe. It feels vague enough to not be the person that we all think it is as well. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for future content. Massively helps the channel grow, and we've got plenty more information coming, so, don't miss out. But enough of that, let's get into the speculation. So, I suppose the first thing that we need to do is just establish who it is that we're talking about. So, in the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth trailer that we saw recently, during the Shinra inauguration parade that's going on for Rufus in June we see a hooded figure. We see a hooded figure just chilling, watching the proceedings, and then they turn around and walk off, and that's it. That's all we see of them. We don't see anything else. They don't look like the black cloaks that we've seen previously, although there are some similarities. They've not got the same markings on their cloak and things like that, and there seems to be additional details to their cloak that isn't on the others. It's reasonably close, but it's enough to make me think that it isn't one of the reunion clones. So if it isn't one of the reunion clones, or at least not a normal reunion clone, then who could it be? Now, we do have a few possibilities for who it could be. We have one that's kind of just been thrown in our faces, and again, like I say, feels like a bit of a red herring. And we'll get that one out of the way first, and that one is Glenn from the First Soldier, well, from Ever Crisis, the First Soldier section of Ever Crisis. Now, Glenn has been introduced to us as part of Soldier P0, which is one of the early phases of the Soldier program. And on top of that, we also know that his team is a part of, well, it is one of the survey units. I don't know if that's something that they do all the time, or something that they've just been drafted into because of the situation in the area that they go to in Ever Crisis. Check out the video that I dropped recently where I talk about the Ever Crisis chapter and break down the first chapter of it. It's something that I'm going to keep doing for each chapter of the First Soldier section of Ever Crisis. So, keep an eye on that, keep yourself up to date if you're not playing the game. But yeah, we've been kind of dropped into a pretty war-torn area where there's still resistance to Shinra from the previously obliterated nation that existed there. Maybe that's the reason why this team's been sent in rather than just a standard team. I don't know. But either way, they're playing the part of one of those survey teams. We meet Sephiroth, Glenn has friendly times with young Sephiroth, loads of things happen. But at the start of the First Soldier section, we see a cutscene of Sephiroth and Glenn. Seems to be going on around the events of Fort Tamlin in Crisis Core. Sephiroth's trying to reach out to Genesis, and then Glenn turns up and he's kind of being like, oh, try to reach out for a friend, blah blah blah. And it suggests that Glenn has turned his back on Shinra, and it also suggests that he possibly knows about what's going on with Genesis, which is something that we'll come back to later on. We'll circle back round to that point. But that is the general situation that's going on with Glenn as far as what we know so far in the First Soldier. And what that does is, it allows us to speculate a little bit about his future. And before we do that, we'll quickly touch on something else that happened. So, a few weeks ago there was a Save Point podcast, a Square Enix thing, and I've touched on this previously in a video, but basically what they were saying was, if you want to know who the hooded figure is in the Rebirth trailer, then you need to play the First Soldier section of Ever Crisis. That's what they suggested, and immediately that sets everybody else down the track. Oh, it's Glenn. It's Glenn. It's obviously Glenn. And do you know what? It probably is. It probably is. But I think it'd be remiss of us to not consider some other options as well. Because how does Glenn survive that scenario against Sephiroth? Like, he seems like he can kind of stand toe-to-toe with Sephiroth a little bit, but everyone seems like they can stand toe-to-toe with Sephiroth a little bit until he stops playing with his food. Once Sephiroth decides, no, I'm actually going to kill you now, then he tends to take care of business. So, the possibility of Glenn surviving? I don't know. Maybe that's the Sephiroth fanboy creeping out, because, it's Sephiroth. He does what he wants. But if Glenn does survive that scenario with Sephiroth, then it is obviously possible that he ends up being the person that we see in the Shinra parade, staring at Rufus, and we don't know what the reason is there. But we can maybe speculate. Now, we know Rufus has got a bit of a shady past when it comes to dealings with Avalanche and kind of working against his father and what his father was trying to do in Shinra. And we also learn about something else in one of the media kits that were released for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that were given to creators and the press and things like that. It talks about something called the Shinra Resistance Committee, which is backed by Wutai's interim government and declares war on Shinra. Now, speculating heavily here, but if the Redoran resistance has somehow maintained itself and continued, or even if some parts of the Redoran resistance have defected to Wutai, maybe Glenn included, because like I say, in that scene at the start of the first soldier section of Ever Crisis, it does seem like it's going on around the time of Fort Tamlin, and it does seem like Glenn is fighting against Shinra, because he's definitely fighting against Sephiroth. I don't know whether there's some kind of personal vendetta there. I'm sure there is, and I'm sure we'll get the details of it. But if that is Wutai, and we do see Glenn in Wutai defending it and working against the Shinra, maybe he is a part of this Shinra Resistance Committee, which would then make sense as to why he's in Junon, kind of scoping Rufus out. Because if this is a Rufus that follows his original trajectory in the original game and the compilation, he's kind of been funding parts of Avalanche and resistances against Shinra just to destabilize his father so that he can seize power. He now has power, so he doesn't need to do that. So if he's turned his back on these groups that he was funding, they're obviously going to be a little bit annoyed at him, and maybe that's why we see Glenn hanging around in the crowd, keeping an eye on him. So that's Glenn, your easy, obvious answer, or is it? Because like I say, they haven't specifically said, oh, that's Glenn that. They've just hinted that it's someone in the first soldier, and everyone else has kind of made the leap. And again, don't get me wrong, there is a solid chance that this is Glenn. But it'd be rude of us. Like I say, it'd be rude of us not to look at other possibilities. So let's start jumping into them. Now, the first alternative possibility, it's a pretty basic one. It's probably not this, but Roche. We all know we're going to see him again. We all know that we're going to get to see him doing some dumb stuff on a motorbike. That's going to happen at some point. Is this going to be Roche? I don't think so. The only way that this can end up being Roche is if some weird stuff's been done to him by Hojo or something like that. And I feel like if they do something like that, we get to see more of it. You know, we'd get to see a protracted breakdown of Roche. We'd see him and he'd be okay, but a little bit crazier. Then we'd see him again and he'd have started degrading, I think. And then we'd see him again and it'd be worse, and etc, etc. In the same way that when we see Genesis in Crisis Core, he gets worse with each progressive meeting that we have with him as the degradation sets in. I think we'd see something similar with Roche. We do also have mention of cellular degradation in soldiers from Dr. Sheeran and how he thinks that may be what the Black Cloaks are. That's something that we'll come to in the future. But it's possible that this could be Roche in a black cloak. As I've said previously though, the cloak doesn't match the reunion cloaks, there's differences. It doesn't seem right to me. So I don't think it's Roche. I personally don't think it's Roche. I've seen a few people say it, so I'm throwing it in here anyway. But I do not think it's Roche. Unless they've done some real weird shit to him. Now next up, we've got a real good one. And this is one that not many people will know about. And there's a reason why I don't think it's this one, and I'll get into that in a minute. But this character is Vidau. Now, if you don't know who Vidau is, I get that, because he has only appeared in Before Crisis and On the Way to a Smile. They're the only two actual pieces of the compilation that we see him in. He is active during the events of other parts of the compilation, but we don't see him. Now, Vidau is a former leader of the Turks. He's the leader of the Turks in Before Crisis, and he remains active all the way throughout the compilation, even having some loose connections with Reeve and the forming of the World Regenesis Organization. However, during the entirety of the OG, except for Meteorfall, they're kind of in the background, characters like Vidau and stuff like that. The only Turks that we really see are the ones that we interact with in the game, so Reno, Rude, Elena, Sung. So Vidau would be free to be involved in the storyline, so there is a possibility that we could see him be worked in. I don't think he'd necessarily be against Shinra. I'm not too sure, kind of 50-50 on it, because he has been through some stuff because of Shinra. There are moral complications that come up with some of the things that he does for Shinra as the leader of the Turks. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in Before Crisis, basically, that I feel like we'd need to have explained, or at least hinted to a little bit before I'd be ready to say this is Vidau. So what I'm waiting for is Before Crisis chapters to start dropping in Ever Crisis. If we see that before Rebirth, then maybe Vidau's in with a shout of being a hooded figure, But at the minute, he's an interesting possibility, but I'm struggling to fit it together at the minute. If you can think of a way to fit Vado into that situation, then please feel free in the comments below. But I'm struggling a little bit. So it's out there, it's a possibility. It's probably slightly more likely than Roche, but not much. Now, the next option, the final option-ish, is a fun one. Everyone knows that Genesis is going to turn up at some point. Let's be realistic. We all know that Genesis is going to turn up at some point in this story. I would be amazed if we don't see Genesis at some point in this story. But can Genesis grow facial hair? Like, we've never seen Genesis with facial hair, and this guy's got like a little bit of a soul patchy thing going on, which is kind of why I went for Roche. It's literally the only reason. But yeah, this little soul patchy beard, like, do we know whether or not Genesis is capable of doing that? I've never seen him with any facial hair, and he's not been underneath Midgar for all that long at this point, so would he be able to grow such a majestic bit of facial hair? And I know that some of you are sat there going, oh, it takes a couple of weeks to grow some facial hair, what are you on about, mate? But Genesis reappears at the end of Dirge of Cerberus, from the end of Crisis Core. And he's not grown a beard, he's got no facial hair at that point, so what, how many years is that? And he's still not grown even a little bit of bum fluff or something? Anything? Just a few little whiskers or something? Now, obviously I can't use that to discredit the possibility that it is Genesis because, you know, things are done better now than they were. I bet no one even considered the possibility, like, would Genesis have grown a beard after being in a cave for about 5 years? No? Yes? Maybe? I don't even think that conversation will have happened back then. So, it's possible that this is Genesis. Genesis would tie into the narrative a lot more, being a sneaky little boy, keeping up with Sephiroth, maybe keeping up with Rufus. Maybe he's got his own anti-Rufus agenda or something to that extent. It's possible. It is very possible. But again, there's nothing conclusive to sit there and say, oh, it's Genesis, amazing. The character that's got the highest probability still is Glenn. And this is why I said I'd circle back to this a little bit earlier. So, we've kind of got it suggested to us that in that first scene of Ever Crisis, Glenn knows what's going on with Genesis. Genesis is actively against the Shinra, and we all know how things panned out in Crisis Core for Genesis. But what if there was a little bit more to it than that? What if they've added a little bit more into it? And what if the thing that they've added is to do with the first soldier? What's to say that this hooded figure that we're seeing isn't Glenn and Genesis at the same time? Glennesis? Glennesis. Yes. So, crackpot theory time. What if, during this scene that we see at the start of The First Soldier, where we see Glenn and we see Sephiroth and they're facing off against each other, and it seems like it's going on around the time of Fort Tamlin when Genesis does defect from Shinra, and Sephiroth can't get a hold of him. So there's your scenario, the scene is set. And during that scene, we can only assume that Sephiroth absolutely decimates Glenn. Because come on, it's Sephiroth. I don't care how strong they make Glenn, he's not beating Sephiroth. So Sephiroth defeats Glenn and yeets off to go and find Zack and carry on the story of Crisis Core as it progresses. But in the background while that's happening, what's to say that the real Genesis doesn't hook up with Glenn and maybe some weird Genova-y based G-Cell stuff goes on? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility. Because, you know, Glenn knows about Genesis seemingly. Glenn would know a fair bit about Soldier and Shinra in general as well, having been a part of the group. We don't know how far he progresses yet at the minute, you know, he's just part of Soldier P0. And we don't know where his story's going to take him. So we don't know how strong he actually does end up getting, but again, it's not going to be Sephiroth level. Nobody is Sephiroth level, realistically, let's be honest about that. So I doubt that Glenn gets that strong, which is what makes me think he's going to lose. But if he knows about Genesis, wouldn't Genesis maybe know about him? Would there not maybe be conversations that have gone on? Because, you know, Genesis has got a large number of seconds and thirds to defect from Shinra along with him, and they end up becoming the Genesis clones and the abominations that we end up seeing. What's to say that Genesis doesn't reach out to Glenn and chat to Glenn, or reach out to Wu-Tai and speak to them, or reach out to the remnants of the Redoran army, or whatever the situation may be? What's to say that this is stuff that we just don't know has happened yet? And as the First Soldier section of Ever Crisis continues, we may get more and more information that supports this. We may get information that completely shits all over it and ruins this little crazy bit of tinfoil hat speculation that I'm doing right now. But yeah, Glennesis. I think it's possible. We've seen examples of other humans being corrupted by one of the soldiers' DNA before and what it does to them. We've seen what happened with Hollander when he was kind of corrupted by Genesis's DNA, and we've seen what happened with Lazard when he got corrupted by Angeal's DNA. I can never think about that without thinking about that little moment where he flies in all awkward as fuck. It will never not make me laugh, that scene. And if it doesn't make me laugh one day, something's wrong. But yeah, we've seen examples of what can happen. Sometimes it can be a full transformation, sometimes it can be a partial transformation. For example, with Hollander, he didn't transform into Genesis, he got wings and he started degrading. Whereas with Lazard, he turned into pretty much a full Angeal clone at that point. He turned into Angeal. So it seems like there's varying degrees of corruption. Hollander is on the side of Genesis, so maybe he can reproduce that and we end up with a hybrid Glenn Genesis situation. Like I say, Glenesis. I really like that name. I hope this is true. I really hope this is true and we can call him Glenesis forever. Oh my god. But I think that's going to be the point where I'm going to wrap this video up. I think that's my main shout for who it could be. The only other real option is that there's someone else in the First Soldier that we've not met yet, and they will make themselves apparent to us as the story progresses, and then we'll be like, oh, it's that guy, right? No Glenesis. Damn. So yeah, that's the only other possibility I can think of. They're my favourites. I think it's Glenn. I'm reasonably confident it's probably Glenn. But, like I say, we've got to explore these additional possibilities. And that's what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. We're going to be diving into some of the theories and some of the bits of speculation that have been flying around since the previous trailer. I almost kind of want to hold off a little bit, though, until we get the next trailer. And by the way, that's going to be at the Game Awards. I'm pretty confident they're not going to let the Game Awards go past without giving us the next trailer. So I would expect it then, which means we've only got like 3 weeks until we get a new trailer. And we've already pretty much had confirmation from Nomura that this trailer is going to be a beefy one. It's going to be one that kind of picks up the mystery again. So yeah, looking forward to that. We'll get as much theory crafting done in between now and then as we can. I'm also going to keep on doing the episodes of the First Soldier section of Ever Crisis, so keep an eye out for them. Chapter 1's already up. I'm probably going to get Chapter 2 done tomorrow and then another theory video in a day or two after that. So please do consider hitting the like button, subscribing for future content, and sharing the videos as well. But more importantly than any of that, have a great day.